Hey class, welcome to week 3. This week we are going to focus solely on types of legal resources and how to find them. So think about this week's readings about the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act when we're going through this and you're learning about legal research. Because if you're going to enforce a law, oppose a law, comply with a law, or sue or be sued under a law, you need to understand not just the plain text of the law itself, but also the legislative intent behind the law, maybe the different names that people use to refer to the same law, the regulations that are authorized by that law, and how agencies implement those regulations to carry out the law, and then how court decisions interpret that law. So the concepts that this week's assigned reading contained will also be relevant to next week's lecture. So we are going to get to what you've read from our textbook, but this is really going to be legal research for non-lawyers. I've broken this up into 2 lectures, again, just because of size, and also I hope that it'll make it easier for you to find what you need when you come back to the lecture slides to review. So feel free, I know this might be a little bit long, so feel free to take a break. Anytime that we switch, from one type of legal resource to another, that would be a perfect time to take a break if you want one. So the number one most important thing about legal research for this class is do not panic. There's not going to be a test. I just want you to become familiar with basic legal research. And the best way to do that is really to just kind of jump right into it. So what we're going to cover here in part 1 is sort of the law generally. What happens once a bill becomes a law, because that's really important for public administrators to understand. And then we're going to talk about secondary legal authority. And these are legal encyclopedias, legislative history, law journals, and treatises. And then in part 2, we're going to talk about primary legal authority. That would be statutes, regulations, case law, and some administrative agency decisions. So these are some standard legal terms and abbreviations that you're going to see while performing legal research. You don't need to memorize them, just be aware that they exist. You can always come back and consult this list or Google something, but basically, to adjudicate is basically to make a final judgment. That's what judges do. That is also what happens during administrative agency adjudications. The appellant is somebody who is appealing a decision to a higher court. The appellee is the party who doesn't want that to be appealed because they liked the lower court ruling. These terms, they refer to parties in court cases. They might vary a little bit by court. CFR, that's the Code of Federal Regulations. Those are all of our federal agency regulations. De novo means from the start, fresh, anew. When a court reviews something de novo, it means they're just going back to square one. You will see this et seq. It's for and sequence or and the following ones, and that just shows that a statute spans more than one section. And that's typical. So if you wanted to cite, for instance, to the Controlled Substances Act, it's 21 U.S.C. It starts at Section 801, but it continues. So the whole thing, you would have to add this and sequence to it. Ex-rel, you'll see in court cases, I would say just pretty much ignore it. FedReg or FR, that's the Federal Register. It's the daily journal of the U.S. government. ID is the way that we cite immediately preceding sources in legal documents. So if you've cited to, Miranda versus Arizona, and then you want to cite to it again, you might just say see ID. Injunctions are court orders to stop doing something or to start doing something. In re is in the matter of. Inter alia, you'll see a lot. It just means among other things. Petitioner, again, that's a person who might be starting a lawsuit or appealing. To remand is an action by an appellate court to send the case back to a lower court for further review and action. Res judicata is the term that we use for a matter that has been finally adjudicated. It's sort of set in stone for now. Respondent is a person responding to a lawsuit or an appeal. Supra is like ID, but not for the immediately preceding citation. USC is the U.S. Code. That's all of our federal statutes, and vacate is what a court does if they cancel or rescind a court order. Again, you don't need to memorize these, but you're going to see them, and so I just wanted this to be available to you. You are also going to see this symbol. Every once in a while, well, actually every semester, at least a handful of students wonder what the heck that squiggly double S is, and it is the section symbol. You can find it by going to insert symbol. It should be there. If you can't find it, don't worry, just type section instead. Okay. When we think about the law, what do we think about? For most Americans, we think about criminal law that we see on TV shows. Now, fortunately, some of those shows are really accurate. In law school, for instance, we would use Law and Order courtroom scenes to practice our objections because they're pretty accurate. But the law really breaks down into two major categories. Laws that govern the relationships between private persons, and that includes organizations and entities, and laws that govern the relationship between the government and someone else. Usually it's the government and a private person or entity, but it can also be government to government. So we all engage in private law transactions throughout our lives. Every time you buy or lease a car, sign up with a cable company, get a credit card, you're governed by contracts law, which is private law. It's about relationships between individuals. There's also government contracts law, which is on the public law side, and that's contractual relationships, with the government, as the name implies. If you sue or you get sued because of a car accident, then you're governed by tort law. If you create a will, act as an executor of an estate, or inherit property, you're governed by probate law. So these are all the different types of law that govern the relationships between individuals. Now, when we act with a government, we are engaging in public law transactions. So for some people, that includes brushes with criminal law, if they commit a crime or suspected of committing a crime. All of us enjoy the protection of constitutional law, which guarantees us certain rights against the government, federal and state governments. And then, of course, we are all impacted by statutes and regulations, statutory law, because like the Matrix, they are all around us. There is also common law, which is the body of law that is made by judges through issuing judicial opinions. Court opinions, court rulings, also call them holdings. Common law is different than statutory law, but here in the US, it's on equal footing. So common law made by judges, statutes that are adopted through the legislative process, those are on equal footing. We've also got regulations, which are promulgated by the executive branch. Until the 1970s, almost all of our environmental law was governed by the common law, primarily nuisance and trespass. So you would sue under the common law because, the smoke coming into your yard from the factory next door was creating a nuisance for you. Or people were throwing out their barrels of waste on your land, and that was trespass. So you would have to sue in court. And it wasn't until the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act that we really started seeing statutory law impact the field of environmental law. So how does a bill become a law? Hopefully we have all watched the How the Bill Becomes Law video. If you haven't, go find it on YouTube. But basically what happens is a bill is drafted by a congressperson or a senator, or more often a lobbyist, or recommended by an agency or some type of special interest group. That is introduced, the bill is introduced to the clerk of either the House or the Senate, and it is assigned a number. So it'll be an HR number if it's in the House of Representatives, an S number for the Senate. That bill gets referred to a committee within either the House or Senate. The committee goes through a hearing, it marks up the bill, it gets calendared for debate, then the bill gets read on the floor and debated, and there are amendments proposed. In the Senate, there might be a filibuster. Then it goes to a full vote of each chamber. And then it is sent to a conference committee so that the House and Senate can hammer out differences in their versions of the law. Because remember, a statute's got to be passed by both the House and Senate. Once the conference committee is done, it goes to the president. If the president signs it, boom, now it's a law. So that's the general process. Obviously, there are lots of bills that get introduced that do not make it to become laws. They just stall out somewhere. But this is the normal process for something that becomes a successful law. Now, a question that people don't tend to ask is what happens after a bill becomes a law? And it's useful to understand this. So, once there's been a bill that's passed the House and the Senate and it's been signed by the president, it is given a public law number. This is simply numbered sequentially by the session of Congress. And that citation format is Pub L, so that's public law, 108-012. 108 in that case would be the session of Congress, so 108th Congress, and 12 is simply, this is the 12th law passed during that session. So that's the start. It gets a public law number. That public law then gets published in pamphlet form, and it's known as a slip law. And this is because you can actually slip them into the back of volumes of laws. Then all of the slip laws from a single session of Congress are combined into session laws, and these are published chronologically in the U.S. statutes at large. And the citation format there is, for instance, 116 Stat 1807. That is where 116 is the volume of the U.S. statutes at large, and 1807 is the page number where that law starts. Finally, the law gets codified into the U.S. Code, and that means that it becomes organized by section. Now, because the U.S. Code is organized by title, and each title covers sort of one broad subject matter area, we often have to break public laws into various pieces and then place them in the appropriate sections throughout the U.S. Code. So when you read a public law, you're reading the entirety of the law passed by Congress. Once it gets codified and placed in the U.S. Code, you're reading individual sections of it. So the citation format, and we'll talk about this more, but the citation format for the U.S. Code is 5 U.S.C. section 551, where 5 is the title, and 551 is the section within that title. Now, why do you need to know this? The main reason that you need to know this is because lawyers, politicians, courts, and the media might use different names to refer to the same law. So, for instance, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act establishes a permit program to regulate discharge of any dredged or filled material into the waters of the U.S., including wetlands. So it's a pretty important permitting process. And I've actually got the text of it here as Section 404A. Now, the EPA, in almost all of its documents, refers to this as Section 404, permit for dredged and filled materials into waters, including wetlands. However, you're not going to find Section 404 in the U.S. Code. That's because Section 404 refers to the section of the public law for the Clean Water Act. But once that was broken up and placed into the code, it sort of gets picked and moved into different places. So Section 404 of the Clean Water Act is actually 33 U.S. Code 1344A. And you can see the text is exactly the same, but you would not necessarily know, looking at 33 U.S.C. Section 1344, that that is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. And this is why I wanted to explain to you the process of what happens after a bill becomes a law, so that you can understand that you might be calling it different things. And if you run into this problem in class, just let me know and I'll actually help you track it. It can be really challenging if you're not used to legal research, to be able to sort of figure out where something is in the US code and how that relates to a public law. So I will help you with that. Just ask me. So here, for instance, is the process for the Clean Water Act after it became law. So what we call the Clean Water Act is really the Federal Pollution Control Act amendments of 1972. It is Public Law 92-500. That means it's the 92nd session of Congress. It was the 500th law. That was actually a fairly active session of Congress. Then it got compiled into the U.S. statutes at large as 86 Stat 816. Then it was put into Title 33 of the U.S. Code. Title 33 is navigation and navigable waters, and the Clean Water Act, obviously, is dealing with those. Title 33 is further broken down by sections, or chapters, I'm sorry. Chapter 26 is water pollution prevention and control. Subchapter 4 is permits and licenses, and voila, Section 1344 is your permits for dredged or fill material. So again, you can see the top one here, that is the public law as compiled into the statute at large, that image. And then you can see at the bottom, that's the same text, but in the US Code. Now, I've got some tips for legal research. The biggest tip I can give you is to become adept at skimming rather than reading. And part of this is, unless you're specifically looking for citations, just ignore them. So for instance, I've got this sentence here, in the Clean Air Act amendments of 1977, public law, blah, 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 statutes, blah, 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 Congress enacted certain requirements. Just skip all of the legal citations when you're reading, because all that they're going to do is kind of make things, it's going to interrupt your flow, it's going to be confusing. So simply skip them. When you skim, you want to skim for headings, bold, and italicized words, as well as other keywords. If you happen to know a specific keyword, like for instance, permit, use Control F to do a keyword search. That works on documents, that works on websites. If you're using a Mac, it's something else, but I'm sure you know what it is. Another tip is if you've got nested menus or a nested table of contents, expand all of them. Expand them so that you can skim through the different titles and sections. And always start, if you don't know where to start with a section that is called General or Definitions. If there's a summary, which in case law will often be called a syllabus, read it. That's going to be really helpful. And also keep in mind that government websites and other legal research resources, they change their layouts all the time. I have to redo these screenshots constantly. And the last time I taught this class, I did the screenshots, and then like literally 1 week into class, a whole bunch of things changed. Hopefully that's not going to happen this time. So hopefully the screenshots that I'm going to have that show you how to perform legal research are going to be useful throughout the semester. Some more tips for legal research. If you don't know anything about your subject or you know very little, start with a legal encyclopedia, and we'll discuss that in just a bit. You can even go to Wikipedia. It actually has really good entries. Just please, please never ever cite to it. Use it to data mine. Again, if there is a section called General or Definitions, start there. I really can't stress that enough. There's usually good information in the very first section of a statute or regulation. Even when it's called definitions, it might not just be all definitions. You'll also be able to check the notes tabs, which will give you some information, and we will discuss that later. But that generally contains the short title, which is the popular name of a law, and it might contain other information like court cases that have overturned a law or affirmed it, or the notes have notes about the law. Again, if your material includes expandable sections, expand everything and then browse through them. If your reference material includes breadcrumbs, use them to backtrack to prior sections. Again, we'll cover that in this lecture. Again, skim, pay special attention to bold and italicized words, use Control F or its Mac equivalent to search by keywords. And again, because students always come to me with this, go back to the beginning and start over with the general or the definition section if you feel like you're not getting anywhere. So, to get started with legal research, you want to know what it is that you need to find. If you need to find statutes, you're going to look in the U.S. Code and in state statutes. If you need regulations, you're going to look at the Code of Federal Regulations or the state equivalent. Agency decisions will be in reporters, bulletins, or agency reports. Court decisions are going to be in case law reporters. Legislative history behind a law, you're going to want to look at the Congressional Record. To get a good overview of a legal issue, check out a legal encyclopedia or Wikipedia. And then if you want a really in-depth examination of a legal issue, that's when you're going to want to look at a law journal or a law review. So back in the old days, if you wanted to locate the law, you needed to get yourself to a law library. Now it is much easier because we've got all of these online sources that can help with legal research. Some of these websites are going to be better than others. You want to find the website that provides accurate and reliable information that also makes sense to you. It's user-friendly for you. And the rest of this lecture is going to take you through a variety of different legal resources and explain how to use them and how to correctly cite to them. Okay, so let's get started. We are going to start with our secondary sources, which are legal encyclopedias, legislative history, law reviews, and treatises. Now, I'm starting with secondary sources rather than primary sources. If you know the name of a case or the citation of a statute and regulations, by all means, jump directly to that primary source. But if you only know a general topic, or you want to learn more about a general topic, secondary sources are a great place to start. So what is a secondary source? These are sources that explain, discuss, analyze, or critique primary sources of law. They are primarily encyclopedias, legislative histories, and law review articles, but some statutes have annotations, and those annotations are also secondary sources. So common secondary sources are the U.S. Code annotated. The U.S. Code is a primary source, but the annotations are secondary. The Congressional Record, American Jurisprudence, AmJur, that's the main legal encyclopedia, law journals, and then treatises, which are sometimes called hornbooks, and these are things like restatements of contracts, restatements of torts. For your purposes, you probably don't need to dig into treatises. So to locate secondary sources, if you want the summary of issues, you can go ahead and check out AmJur, that's American Jurisprudence 2nd edition, or legal dictionaries. They are found in Nexus Uni in the legal reference section, and we'll discuss that. For insight into why or how Congress created a law, you want to take a look at the Congressional Record. That is available on the Government Printing Office, GPO website, as well as the Library of Congress, and then also on congress.gov. And then if you want law reviews, that's going to be also on Nexus Uni. Okay, so let's get started with Nexus Uni. It's in the Auraria library. It's under their database list. So if you just click over to the N and then scroll down, you'll find Nexus Uni. This used to be called, until very recently, LexisNexis Academic. I don't know why it changed to Nexus Uni, but it is unfortunately way less intuitive. Now, fortunately, you can find everything from LexisNexis Academic buried within Nexus Uni. It just takes additional steps. If you personally can access LexisNexis, either the full version or the academic version, or if you can access Westlaw through your work or through another university, just go straight to those and don't muck about with Nexus Uni. But if you're stuck with the Auraria library only, this is what you've got, and so I'm going to teach you how to navigate it. So here is the Nexus Uni screen from the Auraria library. You click on Advanced Search there near the top left, and then you can click to select a specific content type to find options like cases, statutes, and regulations. This is not going to get you everything that you need, unfortunately, and it is a bit of a pain in the butt. But the more that you use it, the more adept you'll become at using it. Now, if you need to find secondary sources on Nexus Uni, I recommend just going to all sources, and you can see that if you click the little menu drop down, you can get to it. There's also, in the middle top kind of the screen, this enormously large search box. You can also just simply try to search in there, although I'll tell you, you're not always going to find what you need. The search, for whatever reason, isn't very well targeted in many cases. Okay, so let's say that you clicked the all sources. You will get a complete list of Nexus Uni sources. This is way more than you need. You can narrow it by category there on the left, or if you know the name of your source, just scroll down to it, or click the letter of the alphabet along the top row there to jump to the sources that start with that letter. In our case, you want to look at AmJur, American Jurisprudence. So you scroll down or you use Control F to find it. Then open up the little drop-down menu, and you will see the table of contents for AmJur. Nexus Uni is going to be your best bet for getting to AmJur. Unfortunately, in most other online legal research resources, AmJur is going to require a paid subscription. So just stick with Nexus Uni. I think you can probably save it somehow as one of your preferred sources to look at, but you can also simply find it this way by scrolling down the all sources to American Jurisprudence. Now, AmJur is an encyclopedia, and it is organized exactly like the Encyclopedia Britannica, Encyclopedia Americana, all of those. So you want to click on those plus signs to expand your topics. Now, remember, if you're not quite sure what you need, just expand all of the sections so that you can browse them, and also remember to read the summary if one happens to exist. Here, I've selected the topic of abduction and kidnapping just to show you AmJur's layout and how you can use it. So I clicked that plus sign next to abduction and kidnapping, and then I also clicked the plus sign on the scope of kidnapping offenses, and then again on the nature of kidnapping, so that I can start to see sections. This is the summary. So if I clicked on the abduction and kidnapping summary, I'll get taken to a short summary of the crimes of abduction and kidnapping. Here you will see the legal citation in case you need to cite to AmJur. Now, unfortunately, AmJur citations are really long because they have to include the name of the topic. So you can see here what I've got highlighted as the full citation. But since it's an encyclopedia, basically the legal version of Wikipedia, you're probably not going to cite to it anyway. You're just going to use it to learn about a topic and then use various links within it to case law and to statutes, basically for data mining. I do recommend expanding the table of contents, which is tucked away on the left side of the screen there. I've got it circled. Now, once I clicked to expand, this was the result. Expanding the table of contents, this is the result that I got. I actually recommend clicking to view the full table of contents. It's easier to use. You'll see that on the next slide. But here we're looking at Section 1, the general nature and historical development of offenses of abduction and kidnapping. If you were going to cite to this section, you would also have to include, the long name of it and the section number. So you see there, I have highlighted the full citation for this particular section of AmJur. Now, again, you want to click that view full table of contents there circled at top left. And this is what you get when you view the full table of contents. I tend to think that this is easier because you can really get a better review of all of the different sections. This used to be like the automatic default when you went to view the table of contents. I really don't understand why Nexus Uni has made it so challenging. Okay, here's where AmJur is really, really helpful. It can help you quickly find answers to certain questions. So let's say for an assignment, or your boss asks you, to be guilty of kidnapping, does the defendant have to use force to confine the victim? Now, back in ye old days when I went to law school, there was no Google. And for the entire first year of law school, we were not allowed to use electronic resources. So we had Westlaw and LexisNexis, but we weren't allowed to use them because they wanted us to be able to do it the old-fashioned way. So we would have to go down to the library stacks, and we would use the print version of AmJur. And if, God forbid, we did not have that, then you really had to slog through volumes and volumes of case law and statutes looking for the answer manually. Now, fortunately, you don't have to go to the library because the library has come to you. So to answer the question of whether force to confine the victim is a necessary element of kidnapping, first expand and skim through the table of contents for abduction and kidnapping. You will see under the heading of basic elements of the crime, Section 24 is about force or threat and confining or taking by force or threat. So that obviously looks like a promising place to find the answer to the question. So if you click that, you will get this Section 24, force or threat. Now, from here, I recommend using Control F to do keyword searches for useful words, or better yet, parts of useful words. So you want to find something about confining a victim. Rather than searching for the full word confining, which will not bring up variations like confine or confined, just go ahead and search for the first few letters of the word. You will see here on the screen circled, I have started a keyword search for confine, but I've just done CONF. That will bring up all of the different locations of information about confining. So here you will see that in some jurisdictions, and this is the very first sentence, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant confined the victim by force. So there you go. You have found at least part of your answer in the very first line. You can also see those little green N1, N2. Click those if you want to go down to footnotes. But for now, let's just stay with that first sentence and then move on to the second sentence of Section 24. And that refers to authority, which means statutes or case law. And as you read that second sentence, furthermore, there is the authority for the view, blah, blah, blah. You will see that the crime of kidnapping does require an element of taking by force. And if you read a bit further, you see that force is not limited to physical force like shoving a victim or pulling a gun on him. Fraud, threats, intimidation, anything that instills fear is considered a form of force for the crime of kidnapping. So there you go. You were asked the question, to be guilty of kidnapping, must the defendant use force to confine the victim? And the answer is yes, the defendant must use force to confine the victim, but force can take a variety of forms and does not have to be physical. Now, I want you to go through and actually do a legal encyclopedia exercise. If you've got to go back and listen to that abduction and kidnapping piece or go through the slides, please feel free. I know that this can be confusing if you're not used to it, but honestly, the best way to do it is just to dive in and start doing research. And that's why there are going to be several legal research exercises throughout this week's lecture. I strongly recommend that you pause the lecture and work through the exercises, or have the lecture slides on hand and work through the exercises after you have finished listening to the lecture. I have created a discussion board in our week 3 module where you can ask questions and get help if you're stuck. It's an ungraded discussion board. You don't have to participate, but seriously, even if you don't post anything, please do take the time to go through these exercises and find the answers. Now, these exercises are not going to be specific to environmental or emergency management law. And that's because those laws can be very complicated. So I want to start you off with easier topics just so that you can practice the process of performing legal research. The process is going to be the same regardless of the complexity of the law, so why not start simple? And then later in our course, you are going to need to know basic legal research in order to respond to our written assignments and to write your final policy memo. So your first legal exercise is to use AmJur, find the section that deals with dead bodies. It's going to be called dead bodies. And then go ahead and figure out what role the courts play in determining what to do with a dead body if there is a family or religious dispute, and the name of the New Jersey court case that discusses the right to dictate the disposition of a decedent's remains, basically who gets to choose what to do with the body. I've got some hints here. Go ahead and pause the lecture and go through this, or just come back to it at the end. And then if you are stuck and cannot find the answers, please do post on the discussion board, or if you went through and found the answer and you want to be helpful to your classmates, please go ahead and make a post. Okay, so we're going to move on from legal encyclopedia, and we're going to talk about legislative history. Here, we're looking at congress.gov. The Congressional Record is a secondary source like AmJur, but it provides specific insight into Congress's intent in passing a law. And states are going to have their own version of the Congressional Record. Now, from congress.gov, you can actually search the Congressional Record. You see that I've got it highlighted there. Or you can use a public law number to find information that is specific to that public law. Okay, so let's check out the 107th Congress. That's actually what was in session when I graduated from law school. So the Congressional Record lets you browse by date within each section of Congress. So that means that you're going to need to use that drop-down menu to find the correct session. You'll see I've got it, the drop-down menu is highlighted in a red box. I want the 107th Congress, so I have scrolled down to that. Thankfully, the people who run Congress's website have taken pity on us, and they have included the dates that match each session of Congress. It used to be that you had to go actually look up a chart, but now you don't. Okay, so click on 107th Congress. And here you will get results from the 107th Congress. You can see that I have scrolled down to May. I graduated from law school in early or mid-May. Honestly, now it was so long ago, I don't remember. So let's take a look at the issue for May 15th. Now you can jump directly to different portions of the Congressional Record, such as the Daily Digest or the start of Senate proceedings or the start of House proceedings. But you can also look at the entire issue in PDF format by clicking that link for entire issue. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the entire issue for May 15th, 2001. And the big picture here, that's what you would get. You would see, because this comes as a PDF, that the issue is 127 pages long. It starts with the House of Representatives, and then it moves on to the Senate. Now, if a chamber of Congress did not meet that day, the Congressional Record will say so. So for instance, the inset down there at the bottom right, that's from January 27th, 2011, and it notes that the House was not in session that day. If you need to access an issue of the Congressional Record that was published prior to the 101st Congress, which was 1989-1990, you're probably going to have to dive into the thrills of microfilm or microfiche at the library, but first I would Google it to see if some website just happens to have put up a copy. Now keep in mind that some legal resources are not going to be available in regular university libraries. You're going to have to go to a law library. Those are located in law schools. Major law firms have them as well. It used to be that law libraries were restricted to students, faculty, staff, and alumni, but fortunately many of them have now opened their doors to the public. So for instance, CU Boulder's Law School, that library is open to the public. If you've got access, so let's say that you need a congressional record from the 1800s, go to CU's law school, go to their law library, and ask one of their law librarians. Law librarians are amazing people. They are really professional, they are very specialized, and they are just like fonts of knowledge that can direct you to the appropriate legal resources. Lawyers rely on them all the time because they can really get you what you need quickly. So if you've got questions about legal research, you can of course ask me during this class, but you can also ask a law librarian. Now, a public law, that's a primary source of law. That is the text of the actual law passed by Congress. But I'm including it here because if you look into public laws on congress.gov, you will actually get some additional legislative history. So if you know the public law number, you can just find a ton of information about that law. You can click a link to get a PDF of the whole law, or you can click on bill numbers to learn more about how the bill was introduced, who co-sponsored it, etc. So there's just a lot of information available to you on Congress's website. Do be sure to click through the tabs. So you can see here that towards the bottom of the screen, well, about halfway down on the left, we are on the Summary tab. But if you want to know to which committee a bill was referred, whether it passed with or without amendments, or the date that the president signed it, you can go ahead and click the Action tab. Here's the Action tab. You will see a reverse chronological list of all of the actions that were taken on this public law. You can also find information about bills that did not become laws. So in that case, that little flow chart near the top of the screen, from introduced to became law, it's going to stall out somewhere prior to became law. So all of these actions on a bill before it becomes a law are part of the legislative history. So this is official information, but it is still a secondary source of law because it is not the statute itself. Okay, the third type of secondary source that we're going to talk about are law reviews and journals. These are great secondary sources if you want to take a deep dive into a specific legal issue, and that includes case law, statutes, and regulations. Law reviews are scholarly publications. They are usually edited by law students in conjunction with law school faculty members. They will contain both lengthy articles and shorter essays by professors and attorneys, as well as what we call comments or notes that are written by students. Law review articles often focus on new or emerging areas of law, and they can offer more critical commentary than a legal encyclopedia. Now, some law reviews are dedicated to a particular topic, such as gender and the law, animal rights law, or environmental law. And they will contain proceedings of a wide range of panels and symposia on timely legal issues, as well as your traditional articles. Many law reviews, particularly the ones from top law schools and the ones that relate to specialized areas of law, are similar to any other academic journal. They go through a peer review process to make sure that they are worthy of publication. Now, the easiest place, in my opinion, to get law reviews and journal articles is by using Google Scholar. That is simply scholar.google.com. If you access Google Scholar from a CU Denver computer, or you are logged in to the CU Denver network with a VPN, you'll be able to get journal articles behind paywalls, assuming that the Auraria Library is a subscriber to that particular journal, but it usually is. So for instance, if you want articles on Chevron deference, go ahead and make sure that you've got articles selected in Google Scholar, not case law, and just Google. Google Scholar, I think, is your best bet because it's going to bring you directly to cases rather than make you go through databases, and it is far more intuitive than Nexus Uni because we all use Google anyway. Okay, so let's say I was looking for Chevron deference. You'll see that here's a whole bunch of articles on it. And the nice thing is, like I said, Google actually will just link you directly to the PDF. So sometimes it'll take you to a database where you can download the article in PDF format, but usually you could just click that link. Like if you want to read about Chevron deference and foreign affairs, it's going to take you to Duke Law School, and it's just going to give you the article in PDF format. Now, you can also find law reviews and law journals on Nexus Uni, but I will tell you, finding them is not an intuitive process. I have been practicing law for a long time. I used to be the senior managing editor of a American Bar Association law journal. I've written articles for journals. I've edited articles for journals. I've looked them up in all types of legal research resources, and Nexus Uni is by far the most challenging. You can browse specific law reviews and journals by going to all sources on Nexus Uni and then selecting law reviews and journals. And from there, you can scroll down to see titles, or you can narrow your results by dates, practice areas, etc. So here, for instance, I have browsed over to environmental law, and I was looking for the Harvard Environmental Law Review. It took me far longer than I would have liked to find it, so again, I recommend just going to Google Scholar. That's just going to be easiest. Okay, that was it for our secondary sources. Please move on to part 2 of the lecture, which covers primary sources of law. That's statutes, regulations, case law, and agency decisions.